Welcome to the Conscious Economics Podcast. I'm your host, Rhiannon Rosalind. I'm a serial entrepreneur and social innovator. I like to gather people from all different walks to talk about what I call the conscious economy. I believe that we can create a more equitable system, one that honors the well-being of people, the well-being of the planet, the well-being of business, and includes art and creativity. Join us each week as we tackle a different intersection of this big but critical conversation. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Conscious Economics Podcast. We're back together, Aseel and Rhiannon. And what are we talking about today, Aseel?
We are talking about the hedonistic economy.
So hedonistic economy.
That's right.
What does that mean?
Well, let's define the word hedonic first. And the hedonic belief is that you want to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. So you ultimately really believe that your choices should be made in a way that absolutely maximize that pleasure concept. So that's why there's some people who say there's an inherent selfishness with being a hedonistic person, because technically you're focusing on your own personal pleasure at the cost of anything that gets in the way of that.
Okay. When I picture that word like hedonistic, I picture like people laying around and being fed grapes and like this whole kind of scene. I don't know if it's like an old TV show I'm referencing in my mind or what, but you're saying that this really applies to the way our current economy functions, that we are kind of living in a hedonistic economy.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought the TV reference, because a good reference of that would be like The Wolf of Wall Street, if you've seen that movie. Yep. Leonardo DiCaprio played the role. It's based on a true story, and he was playing the role of Jordan Belfort. So like picture a typical whether it's a hedge fund manager or like a Bay Street or like a corporate leader who's technically just living in that consumerism mentality, and they're constantly throwing massive amount of money on things that don't even are not even justified. And like even my husband the other day was telling me that Elton Jones was bankrupt because of his flowers bill.
Elton John?
Yeah. Is that how you say it? Okay, Elton John.
I was like, Elton Jones. Don't know him, but Elton John.
So $30,000 a week was his fresh flower bill.
Flowers. Wow. But this is, again, it's something we've talked about on the show before, this idea that this has been very much celebrated in our culture, this idea of having all of these luxuries, having multiple cars, having multiple homes. And now we're starting to see this trend towards people being more conscious about those things. And that's something definitely we want to encourage. I do want to also say that these hedonistic tendencies, I don't just want to be singling out Bay Street or hedge fund people, because whether we have a lot of money or whether we have a little bit of money, that tendency to want to skip over the pain points, skip over and just have that instant gratification, I feel like it's really, really embedded in our culture across the board.
100%.
Right now, for sure. But that's definitely an example that we could think of. But I just want to be mindful that we're not singling out any one individual, but saying that this is really something that we all need to look at. And I think that is really true even for myself. Like I think of all the times throughout the day that I choose convenience as opposed to doing the thing that maybe would be more economical, but maybe it's a slower pace or whatever. Like I love convenience. Mm-hmm. I've been programmed that way, I feel. Yeah. So I'm willing to pay for it.
I'm glad you clarified that, because when I used that example, it was more like a stereotypical example to put a reference, because most people would understand what that means. But these principles we've discussed in this podcast is meant for us to all be aware of, because it impacts us differently and it's across the board. So the concept, there's two different angles to look at when we think about the hedonistic economy. First, the discomfort with emotions in general. Mm-hmm. So technically, when people are doing whatever it takes to numb emotions, it's because they're, first of all, not used to processing or feeling things out or flushing out emotion, that we're used to numbing it. Mm-hmm. So there's that concept. And the second one, it's that dysfunctional belief that more is better, and a bigger house, a bigger car, a better this, a better that. So you're constantly on that treadmill wanting to accumulate more, with the perception that this is going to bring me more happiness in my life. So there's two things or two angles on to look at: the avoidance of pain and the pursuit of pleasure.
Yeah. So let's start with the avoidance of pain. I think that that's so true. And I feel like we've never been taught how to process our emotions. That's not something we were taught in school. We usually don't have examples at home because this has been intergenerationally ingrained. I know that it's very much, ingrained in the way that I was brought up, that only certain emotions were acceptable and other emotions were not. So, if you were happy, that's acceptable, but only to a degree. Can't be too happy, can't be so happy that you're not considerate of someone else who's not happy. So it's this constant sort of hypervigilance around how do I need to behave, how do I need to show up, and what do I need to suppress in myself. And I know, because I have outed myself many times, that I've had lots of issues around addiction to shopping, addiction to money. And if I really drive down into like what was driving that behavior for me, it was this low self-worth and this inability to process my more difficult emotions, like the feelings of unworthiness. Of Instead of feeling those feelings, understanding why they were there, I tried to mask them. I tried to pretend that I was at a different status with the clothes that I wore, the things when really I was struggling still. Yeah.
So I'm in my 4th year of therapy training, and only now, after years of not just extensive therapy, receiving therapy as a client, but also learning therapy, that I feel that I'm now starting to grasp the concept of feeling our emotions, connecting with our body, processing unfinished business from the past. So it is a journey, and it is something that does require commitment on your part. But what's interesting to understand about this is, while thoughts are the language of the brain, emotions are the language of the body. So for us to understand emotions, we really need to connect to our bodies. We're not going to understand our emotion trying to rationalize or think about something logically.
Right.
And our body and our, for us to get to that frequency, it's a much slower pace than a typical logical argument would be. So that's why in body work, somatic work, therapy that really focuses on the body, it tends to be a much slower pace therapy. And at the beginning, I still am to a certain extent an anxious person. I'm highly energetic. And I used to see these things as positive traits, but also it was meant to mask some of these discomfort or uncomfortable emotions that I also had. So at the beginning, I'd be losing patience with therapy. I'd be losing patience with some of the questions, like, what are you aware of in your body right now? Like, that question was extremely foreign for me at the beginning of my therapy.
So broad. It's interesting. So a couple of patterns that I started to realize. One was when I was trying to make changes to my diet. So if, let's say, I was on a particular diet or I was trying to eliminate sugar, I actually found myself shopping more. So, and never really made the correlation that I was numbing perhaps with food. And then when I take that numbing agent away, now this other one's showing up. And I used to think, oh, it's because I'm feeling better in my body. So I want to purchase, a new dress or a new outfit because it feels more fun to shop when you feel better in your body, which is true. And so when you're not feeling good, you may not want to numb that way. So there are different ways that we numb. The other thing that I noticed as someone who did grow up in a sort of, I had a lot of trauma throughout my life, and I do a lot of what's called disassociation, where I'm actually disassociated from my body. So I'm not actually present in my body or in the moment. And so sometimes when something really triggering would happen, or a big event, something that I should feel a lot of emotion around, I actually felt very numb. And I thought that this was like a good thing, like, oh, I'm just really in control. But then realizing after, I may not have actually felt anything because I've trained myself to disassociate, but then noticing that I'm consuming more chocolate, or I'm shopping, a few hours later or a few days later, not making the connection. So how do we make the connection? Like how can we start making the connection, especially when it comes to this consumerist or hedonistic economy? Because everywhere around us, we're being marketed to. On our phones now, it's like a constant marketing, even before when it was television and you could like walk away during the commercials. Now, if you're getting up in the middle of the night, a lot of us are addicted to our phones, and those phones are reading our algorithms and pushing us more things to consume. So how do we deal with this?
So I really love all these examples that you've shared, and I value your vulnerability so much. I always do, because this is the path to economic healing, is first of all to acknowledge the trauma we've experienced in the past, to bring awareness to it, and to, depending on what we're dealing with, we bring healing into that past unfinished business. And when the more aware we are, the more we start connecting these thoughts. So at the beginning, you may notice it, a few days later you start connecting. But the more reflection and mindful exercise you're engaged in, and I do recommend you having that as part of your daily habit, daily routine, be it in the morning or something you do in the night, just sitting and reflecting on some of these things that come up for you, you're gonna draw the connection. You'll start to notice, when I'm feeling sad, I'm like throwing my money at things that I perceive bring me joy. When I'm feeling a certain emotion, here's how I react. So it becomes like a clear distinction. When X happens, Y is the reaction I choose. And once you become aware of this unconscious pattern, because it's a pattern you're just habitually doing, then you can start being mindful and changing that. Like when X happens, now that I'm aware that this is what I used to do, what is something I want to now replace this habit with that is going to be more constructive to my financial health? So there's different ways of dealing with it, but I do believe at the heart of it is therapy and mindfulness.
Hold that thought. We have a quick word from our partners before going back to the episode. This podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, RBC Investies. Backed by expert human advisors, RBC Investies is a smart, online, automated investment service that allows you to invest with low effort and low cost.
Open your first RBC Investies account and pay no management fees for your first year. Plus, start investing with as little as $100. Simply visit rbcinvesties.com/getinvesting and sign up using promo code AA407.
And now back to the episode. I had this really interesting experience just last weekend. So, of course, because we've been in a pandemic, we haven't really been going out as much. We haven't been going to shopping malls and these kinds of places. And also just with everything that's happening in the world right now. So obviously there's wars happening all over the world. And I really want to emphasize that. And this has been an ongoing situation where there's conflicts and now there's, this war happening in Europe that's gotten a lot of media attention. And it's interesting because it's getting more attention maybe than some of the other conflicts that are happening around the world, including in Palestine. So one of the interesting things, though, was I was feeling into all of these emotions of just the state of the world, of where everything's at. And then we went to the mall. And when I walked into the mall, for some reason, something just hit me differently. And I was looking around at all of these like shiny objects and bright lights and colors and scents and sounds and all of these things. And I was very much overwhelmed. I was having one of those moments where I was taking it all in. But then I was like, look what we're doing. Like, look at what we're doing. Like, all of this is here as such a distraction, making us feel like we're going to get this, and somehow it's going to take away the pain. But the pain I'm experiencing is of this unconscious system that we're living in, is this world where, what's driving our economy is this mass consumption, is this mass destruction of our planet, of each other. And here we are with these like plastic toys and things that are just, one moment you care about it, the next moment it's just in another pile with the other things that you don't even think about anymore. And something about it just hit me so much more deeply. And I really think that many of us are being called right now to actually consider this hedonistic tendency, this pleasure over pain. And instead, it's actually more painful.
It is
in
more
the
painful
end.
because it's filling a void with. So the way I describe it is you've noticed a gap or a void or a hole in your life, whichever term feels relevant to you to refer to it as, but you're filling it with the wrong thing. And the more you fill it with the wrong thing, the wider this gap becomes. This is how I like to refer to it because it's so true. And actually, there's a theory called the hedonic treadmill theory, which refers to the fact that we have a happiness set point, which means, the average day you have a specific level of happiness that you are accustomed to. And what that is, there's a positive psychologist, her name is Sonia Limborisky, who said that 50% of that happiness set point is determined by your genes, 10% by your life circumstances, and 40% in your control. So I don't know if I fully believe in these percentages, because there's so many different theories out there. There's other theories that say even though genes play a role, we do still have control over our genes. And there's a book called The Biology of Belief that proves that the way we interact with our bodies and cells actually do change our genetic makeup as we age. So there's different theories out there. So I'm not really taking these percentages at face value. But the reason I'm mentioning them here, because I was particularly struck by the percentage of life circumstance, which was only 10%. So only 10% of your life circumstance contributes to your happiness. And the rest is more your attitude, your beliefs, your behavior, the way you choose to react to these circumstances, if you will. Plus, obviously, some predetermined genetic makeup. I'm sure it plays a role, but how much is arguably different from one scientist to the other. So I was really struck by that, and I thought it was a really important thing to bring into this episode for us to discuss it. But going back to the hedonic treadmill, so that happiness set point, in whichever percentage it's constituted, anytime something really positive happens in your life, you go over this happiness set point, and anytime something negative, you go under it. But you always go back to that
baseline.
The baseline, exactly. So that's why when people win the lottery, they're not high on life forever. They're high for a few weeks maybe on happiness, but then they're back into that baseline.
So interesting. Well, and also just kind of I've been doing a little bit more studying around neuroscience and how the brain functions. And one of the things that's really interesting is that whenever we have a peak emotion, our brain counterbalances it with taking us kind of sort of in a lower emotion so we can come back to balance. Like our brain is always trying to bring us to equilibrium. So when we have this heightened, let's say winning the lottery, and there's this heightened emotion, there's all this surge, we feel so happy, our lives are completely different, but right away, like this is a world of polarity, this is a world of contrast. So while we think that that's going to bring us this lasting happiness, all of a sudden we have fighting with family members because we haven't given the money, or there's things we didn't consider that now are starting to bring us down. Yeah. And so it's this idea of like any perfect state or achieving a set state and then thinking that we're going to stay there, whether it be because of a financial, windfall or whatever it is, isn't actually the way we function. We are dynamic beings and we're constantly always fluctuating through these cycles. So there is no permanence, just like in the Buddhist philosophy, there is no permanence. Everything is impermanent. Everything is fluctuating. Everything is changing, including your emotions. So a difficult emotion that you're feeling or experiencing, whether it be situational or just something that's coming up in you, if you do allow it to run its course and move through, it moves through. It doesn't stay. But when we start to feel that little bit of discomfort, we immediately want to do something about it, shove it down, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it comes out in a larger wave. Yes. So that is so interesting.
What I really want to add to that as well, which is really important, because back to the question about like what to do about it, a lot of us start thinking about conditioning our thoughts to be different. And some people believe controlling your thoughts are easier than controlling your emotion. Everybody is different, so that may be true for some people. But unless your thoughts and emotion are aligned, change won't happen. Because like I said earlier, thoughts are the language of the brain, emotions are the language of the body, and the brain and the body need to be aligned for change, for momentum, for sustainability to take place. So you may start thinking positive thoughts about abundance, about opening yourself to maybe intrinsic wealth versus empty wealth. But if you don't wholeheartedly believe that to be the case and believe these emotions to be true, then your thoughts are just now at war with the emotions that you're experiencing in your body, which is why healing trauma around money is important. And that's where therapy and mindfulness exercises can come in place. So it really is an art and science, because you're processing your emotion, but you're also introducing some strategic and logical steps in order to integrate and translate this new beginning into an external reality.
100%. And I think that it's so important, and this is why we do this podcast, this is why we have these conversations. It's so important to normalize this way of thinking, because we have been trained and conditioned, especially in the Western world, that success equals what you wear and what you own and how many things you have and the title that you have. And we have been trained that emotion is messy and it's not professional, and there's no welcome place for it, and it's something that you have to hide and repress. And these are all things that in the new economy, in the conscious economy movement, we know that this has to transform and change, because look how sick we are, and look how disconnected we are, not only from our own selves, our own bodies, not even being able to identify what something makes us feel inside our own physical being, but also the planet that gives us life. And, we could go on and on and on. And when I reflect on the times when I've felt most satisfied, most happy in my life, it's not when I bought a big purchase or got a raise or even got an award of some kind. It was when I was able to be vulnerable and connected with people. Those are the memories.
I love that you said that so much, because I truly believe belonging and connection is like absolutely very, very important. But how can you connect with the outer world if you feel disconnected from within you? So it's a journey within that supports your connection with the world and the relationships around you. And this is why money is a very complex thing, because money in itself is intertwined with your identity and with who you see yourself to be and who you see yourself in comparison with the social circle that you're surrounded by.
And even, how you connect. Like, I know certain friend groups that it's always going out for these dinners, or it's always doing these things, and that's all related around money. But really, if we just went on a free walk in the woods and told each other how we were really feeling inside of our hearts, we'd probably remember that so much more than some dinner with a whole bunch of distraction around us and some big slab of cow on a plate. I don't know why I said that, but
I don't know what that means. I'll ask you later. So
steak.
Oh, steak. Okay. So what I really want to leave the audience with are some questions, because it's important, while you can theoretically start engaging with these principles and start thinking and bring awareness to how this translates into your life, like how do you translate that into practical action? And some of the first steps of it is really to reflect on some key questions that you can ask yourself. Particularly, for example, if you're an impulsive shopper, key questions can look like, why do I want this object? Who am I buying it for? This is a really cool question to ask, because sometimes when you dig deeper, you think you're buying it for you, but then you realize, I'm actually buying it to fit in this group. So technically I'm buying it for them, not for myself. One question I always like to ask some of my clients is like, if you're in the middle of a forest, that very famous saying, and if a tree falls, did it make a sound? Well, similarly, if you're in the middle of the forest and no one's going to see this item that you're going to buy, do you still want it? And if the answer is yes, then that object holds intrinsic wealth for you. And then you can get creative in finding ways to get it, be it a car or a dress or whatever. But if the answer is no, then you're not buying it for yourself. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't buy it. That's not, like, everything is nuanced. It's not black and white, but at least it gives you an idea and an understanding to shine the light in some of your habits, to understand yourself better. How do I make my purchasing decisions? What is it supporting me through? One of my clients, for example, was a shopaholic, and a lot of her, tendencies was to mask her insecurity. She felt that clothes are the only things in her life that she has control over. So she was obsessive about like being in the best outfits all the time. But and it's not to take away her love for fashion. We want to support, she still loves fashion. But it's also to address that you're not feeling worthy, and that's the real issue. So how can it's not a budget that you need. We really need to work on these underlying layers that now we have been now that we've covered that this is really the issue
it's
here.
So true. I would also add to ask yourself or notice when you do make, an impulse purchase, what does it feel like in your body? So after you make that purchase, usually there's a high or there's a really good excited feeling. You're going to wear these fresh clothes. You're going to get this certain attention. But how long does it really last?
Yeah.
And when does that new piece become old? If it's only in a couple of weeks to you that already it doesn't feel like it has that same energy, then that's another signal and a sign that maybe there's something else going on, and that's what you're doing. And we're in that fast fashion cycle, right? Where even the way that the industry performs is to bring all of these fresh items all the time. So you constantly feel like you need to kind of keep up with the trend. And where does it stop?
Yeah.
Like, where does it end?
Another really cool question, and this may take you or you may need the support of a professional with, is what emotion fueled that purchase? That's really important because you can now identify patterns. Oh, it looks like most of my purchases are done when I'm happy, or are done when I'm feeling angry, or I'm done when I'm feeling like insecure. And so now you understand what you do to mask some of these emotions, and it supports that further awareness and hopefully create better habits for you. But all it starts with is awareness, and then it's followed by a commitment to change once you identify what's no longer working or serving your financial health.
100%. And if you are intrigued by these questions and you want to be a part of a supportive community, then sign up at consciouseconomics.ca. You can become a member. It's free, and you'll be able to find out about the workshops. Aseel hosts a monthly economic healing session, which is live coaching financial therapy for small groups. So if you feel called to get involved, please do check out the website. Thank you so much for joining us again this week, and we will see you with another episode next week. Bye. This podcast is brought to you by CPP Investments. At CPP Investments, they never lose sight of the long term. They invest the Canadian Pension Plan Fund to help provide financial security for generations of Canadians.
They diversify the CPP fund across geographies and asset classes to access the best investment opportunities and generate sustainable long-term returns. The fund is now more than $400 billion.
To learn more about their investment performance for Canadians, visit cppinvestments.com.